Hello, denizens. Welcome to This Week in Mormons. I'm Geoff Openshaw, the hostest with the mostest. Happy to be here with you. Thank you for joining us for another week of Latter-day Saint news and commentary. I am thrilled to be accompanied once more by a man who hasn't been with us for a little while, actually, Mr.
Yeah.
Devin Thorpe. How are you doing, sir?
It is great to be with you. My life is better just because you've invited me to join you tonight. So thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here, sir. What I love about Devin is when he says things like that, in my mind, I think he's just using dry humor and sarcasm, but he's actually being sincere and he's genuine. He means all these words.
Yes, I do.
And I admire that in a person because I'm not native. I would say the same thing. I'd be like, oh, it is changing my life to be here, Devin. It's a delight. And I would be like that. So,
You're great.
So I appreciate your sincerity. It's something I aspire to quite a bit. So what's been new? Last time I think we had done the show we did kind of a debrief on the election. We did a post-mortem there, and
I double checked. I still did not win the election. I am still not.
You did not contest the results.
I did not contest the results.
You did not march on Provo City Hall.
I did not stop
the shrine of Curtis.
My race. So I remain not a congressman.
Well,
Yeah.
You and Ben McAdams, you guys.
Yes. I think the hardest part for Ben McAdams losing is that he now is like me. I think it keeps him up at night. No, I'm just kidding. But, Ben, great human being. But I think this is the first time he's ever lost an election. And you can see in his eyes, he did not like it very much.
That's hard, especially in the 3rd district where it's really, 4th district where it's really tight typically. Yeah. So that's
and
tough.
So yes, it is tough, and he's a phenomenal human being, and he will be back. He will clearly run for something in 2022. We'll be talking a little bit maybe about Mike Lee later on, and I'm hoping Ben will run against Mike for the Senate seat here.
That's tough. I don't think he'd win, though. Do you think
it's a tough race?
He'd be a sacrificial lamb for that one. Yeah, that's.
I think he's got the best chance of any Democrat.
That's fair. I would,
but it will be an uphill battle.
A moderate Democrat against a almost libertarian streaking Republican. Mm-hmm. That could be very interesting. That could be very interesting. And Mike Lee's up in 2022. Yeah. I don't live in Utah, so I miss out on all this good fun that all you people get to have out there. Out here, though, since it's an odd numbered year, we get to have our governor race, I believe, this year. So that's Virginia does things in a quirky way. Our state elections are in odd numbered years, and governors can only serve one term. And so what it changes, though, is it makes it so whoever is lieutenant governor is sort of the de facto nominee to become governor next time around. You're like governor junior for 4 years, then you become governor. But it is kind of cool because then governors straight up cannot run for re-election while they're in office. So all they can do is focus on governing, which is why Virginia is one of the better run states in the country, my friends, except we're not quite where we need to be in terms of vaccine rollouts and getting shots in arms. We're lagging a little bit on that front. But
Utah's not doing very well there either. I suspect in Utah it has a little bit to do with a lack of interest. I don't know how true that is in
No, I mean, out here, I think we're down with it for the most part. I mean, Virginia, like most states in the country, is seeing a greater gap, a greater chasm between urban areas and rural areas in terms of how they vote politically. I mean, I think America used to be a lot more mixed up. I mean, a lot of even farming communities voted Democratic for a very long time because Democrats were the ones sponsoring all sorts of subsidies for farmers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But things change, right? And so now we're seeing very stark lines drawn. So you have huge parts of like Western Virginia, Shenandoah Valley, everything going along the Appalachians, deeply Republican territory. I don't know what the mood is about vaccines in that case. But that's how the whole state is. It's rural areas that are deeply red. And then there's just these blue pockets of Richmond, Hampton Roads, the DC suburbs, and like Charlottesville and Roanoke. And that's how it is,
Yeah.
So I'm excited, though. I am excited that vaccines are rolling out. I think they are a wonderful blessing. I certainly hope. I understand
Absolutely.
I understand people have different opinions, but I think, and of course, if you're in a situation where you might react adversely to a vaccine. And those are genuine and real situations. I've even been there. I got a pneumonia vaccine once and it wrecked me for like 5 days. I might as well have just had pneumonia, honestly.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if you're able to get one, I certainly hope everyone will get one so that we can nip this thing in the bud. Let's get this thing over with. Let's do this. We're getting there, folks.
Let's do that.
We are getting there. And how is it for you guys? Do you have church? I know Utah's Utah, but in Salt Lake, I mean, do you have church in person? Are you attending in person? What's the situation
our
like
ward settled on inviting half the ward every week, and we do a Zoom cast of the meetings. And so it's my sense that there are more people participating every week via Zoom than in the room, but I haven't been since I spoke in September. And then you may recall that the case counts in September really spiked. Yeah. And so my wife, who is a little more frail than she and I have tried to be as careful as we can. And so far we've avoided getting COVID. So we've been careful enough so far, apparently.
Does your ward have a cap, though? I mean, you're doing half the ward each Sunday, but is there an actual numerical number they will not exceed, period?
We don't have a cap, but our pre-COVID attendance was about 125. So, half would be 60, and some of that half don't go. They just participate online. So I'm thinking there are 30 or 40 people probably in the chapel.
Okay. And for anyone listening, you're probably hearing, wait a minute, Devin lives in Utah and he has 120 people in his ward. Yes, downtown Salt Lake is a different beast in terms of church units and how many people are actually going. So that doesn't surprise me. I remember a friend of mine was living, there's even a branch in downtown Salt Lake. Like, it's so weird there. Yeah. And he said the branch was pretty much just existed to handle welfare issues for basically.
There are several branches.
Yeah. And he was the ward. They called him as the financial clerk at the time. And he was like, wow, I've never seen it. Like, this is an incredible insight into like the most amplified version of welfare in a ward and of helping people out like that. Like, he's never seen it like that in his life, which I think could be a good lesson for a lot of us. We realize how much the church does kick in to help.
Yeah, it is really inspiring to see what goes on in these inner city wards where, there were years when I was in the stake presidency here where, we were doing on the order of $1 million a year in the stake of welfare and fast offerings combined in terms of support for families. So counting DI coupons and food, it was up in that area.
That's
of $1 million a year.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I'm grateful we have the resources to pull for that. And that, for many, I know that when you pay fast offerings, initially it stays local, but then it can get passed along. And it's good that we can support that at a church level. Certainly. I mean, I've been the recipient of help from a ward at different times in my life. And I think it's great. It's great that we can do that. And it's great that we can be there for one another.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Lots of Latter-day Saint news going on this week, Devin.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Lots of things, especially because last week we had an interview. If you have not heard our interview with Liz Brown McDonald, listen to this episode first, then go back and listen to last week's. It's a great discussion about where she conducted a study with young adults who had left the church and described themselves as having, quote, religiously rigid parents, basically. And it was a study of whether parents' religious rigidity has what kind of adverse effects it can have on their children, on young adults in particular, in making them choose potentially to leave the church. Very interesting discussion. It was great having her on. So
it was fantastic.
Oh, good. So you listened. So
this episode before you listen to that one.
Listen to this one, but check that out. That was a great one. Evergreen content there. I think you'll get a big kick out of it. And yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff has been happening because of that, because we're basically on 2 weeks of news. And, I don't want to bury the lead, but I feel like maybe I should not go with the obvious choice for the first story to keep the people interested. So I'm going to lead off with news that broke today, Devin. Today.
The tragic news.
The Hill Cumorah Pageant is over forever, everybody. If you remember, it was back during 2018, which I kind of refer to as the year of lustration. If you've never heard of that term, it's a term used in the former Soviet Union to mean sort of removing communist insignia and names. It's sort of removing the communist legacy from cities and communities in former Soviet states. Lustration is an interesting process, and that's kind of what we got into starting in 2018 when President Nelson got serious about removing Mormon and changing a lot of the things we did and all that. And one of the things announced in the fall of 2018 was that pageants, like the Cumorah Pageant, the Mormon Miracle Pageant in Manti, Nauvoo Pageant, the Mesa Pageant, pageants would either stop altogether or be reduced in scope. So we've known for a while this was going to happen. And we knew that the Cumorah Pageant wasn't going to last much longer. It's the most prominent of any of these, but it was on the chopping block, which is sad. By the way, the statement said that local celebrations of culture and history may be appropriate, but larger productions such as pageants are discouraged. So I think that is why pageants in Mesa and maybe like the British pageant, things that kind of celebrate more of something in church history or sticking around. But these big pageants like in the Cumorah, where it's just this massive undertaking, telling the whole story of the Book of Mormon and all this, no more. So this year was supposed to be the last year for the pageant. They did it in 2019. 2020, obviously they did not do the pageant because of COVID. And then the church just announced today that also because we're still in the pandemic, we're not there yet, they have postponed all pageants that were to take place in 2021. So the Nauvoo pageant, the British pageant will still happen in 2022. The Mesa pageant will kick into gear again once the renovation project is done at the Mesa Temple. The Mesa Temple's been closed for a couple of years now for that. But they're not just going to give the Cumorah pageant a victory lap and bring it back next year for fun. That's just it. It's done.
Just done.
That's it. Never to return.
It's sad in a way, but it's it's clearly the direction we're going. But the Cumorah Pageant was a phenomenal program. It may or may not have had a big impact on missionary work, which we think was its kind of objective.
I doubt it did.
But especially in recent years, attendance was off, and it was almost all Mormons. But my gosh, it was a spectacular program. I went to school in upstate New York, a grad school, and so we attended one summer. And it.
Did you go to Cornell? Did you go to Cornell, Devin?
Yeah, yes.
Did you go to Cornell?
It's about as subtle. It's about as subtle as.
Did you study agriculture?
Went to school in Cambridge. Yeah,
I went to school in Cambridge, like Big Red. I mean, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm too modest to say what school, right?
Was it on the Finger Lakes, Devin? Get lost in them Finger Lakes.
I'm so glad you give me crap.
But anyway, that's cool. You got to go. I've never been to one of these pageants, and since I believe the closest one to us down here in DC is up there in Palmyra. Yep. We talked about, my wife and I discussed maybe we would actually want to go and check this out for its final run. This was before COVID happened at all. So this year, I don't think we've been optimistic that it would have happened, but I'm a little sad. I mean, I think you say they're wonderful. I admit, I look at them and I think they seem kind of goofy to me, but I've never been, and I want to experience
going to a drive-in movie, except that it's a stage play or something. And so I've always just thought they were fun. You can debate, the religious implications, the doctrinal teaching quality, et cetera, is all, eye of the beholder stuff. But I really enjoyed them. I've been to the Manti pageant several times. I've been to what do they call it? The Man Who Knew. I think up in Cache Valley, they do a pageant there.
That's a Bill Murray movie.
You're thinking of The Man Who Knew Too Much, but maybe not.
Little.
But
no, it's The Man Who Knew Too Little. Yeah,
too little. Yeah, but the one up in Cache Valley is about Martin Harris.
Oh yeah, I know. I've heard of that.
Returned to the church late in life and lived up there, and so it's a celebration of him coming back and bearing his testimony. And that one, in some ways, was my favorite because the Smith brothers, Joseph and Hiram, were so young when they were killed that it disconnects us from the history that was really quite recent. I got to know Hiram's grandson, Hiram. And so I knew him 25 years ago. when he was 90, and I don't think he'd ever, obviously had not met his grandfather, or maybe it was great grandfather, but because uh, Martin Harris lived to be very old, he connected several generations of Mormons to all those church history stories that we hear, and yet the people who really lived them, by and large, were gone, and he was still around. So it was kind of a cool pageant. I like it.
I think that maybe that one will survive. I don't know, because it's rooted in history. It's smaller scale. Yeah. For those who have never seen these, I mean, I think we have ideas what the pageants entail. And especially I want to know the difference. You've got the Cumorah Pageant and the Mormon Miracle Pageant in Manti. What's the difference between the two in terms of the story they tell, or like length, or anything? I mean, what is each one about?
So
and why?
I don't remember the stories very well, so I'm not the right person to ask, but I have seen them both. And the Palmyra pageant, of course, emphasizes the story of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
And the Manti pageant works in the story of the pioneers into that story. So it's sort of flashbacks and a retelling, but it incorporates the story of the pioneers because it's Manti, which was settled by pioneers.
Yeah, of course. And the Manti one's interesting to me because, I mean, they do it on the hill. Like, there's a temple just in the background, like as a backdrop the whole time you're doing it. So do they do it? Do they close the temple early for temple work when it's pageant night? Or could you potentially be in there doing a session and there's this multimedia presentation happening out the window while you're inside?
Yeah, I don't know. I presume they don't. I presume they close it.
I would think so. And I know that one's done too. That one already completed its run, and that's
it was done last year, right, or the year before,
Yeah. Manti Temple, best temple in the church, people. I'm serious, it is. I'm not joking. That is the best temple in the church. If you rank temples, Manti is easily number one. Go ahead, fight me, Devin.
I did not know that. I will just take that as gospel truth.
No, it is. I think I told Rosie Card this a few weeks ago. It is the greatest temple in the church, bar none. Everyone should go there. So I'm sad to see this go. I hope someday I can see something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of stories, should we talk about Murder Among the Mormons? Is it okay if we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a big thing that came out over this weekend. Yeah, the new Netflix docu-series, Napoleon Dynamite director involved in it. I mean, lots going on here. Let's talk about it. I have not watched it yet. I'm a bad Latter-day Saint.
I watched it. I thought it was very well done. It's very interesting. It's rather short. It's just 3 episodes. None of the episodes is longer than an hour. And so if you wanted to, you could do it in a single sitting.
Hold on. But you know what else I can do with 3 hours? I can watch Avengers Endgame. So
yes, you could.
I don't know, Devin. I don't know.
Yeah, so it is a tough decision for I get that. So
I could watch half of a Lord of the Rings movie in that time. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is an interesting story for me because my father worked with and knew very well Gary Sheets, whose wife was killed by the bomb, and knew well Steve Christensen, who was killed by the bomb, because they worked together at Coordinated Financial Services. And Mark Hofmann had targeted those two because they were the principals of Coordinated Financial Services, and he wanted to make it look like it was a disgruntled investor. And that kind of worked. But yeah, it's a messed up story, and there are some things that I think we may never know because it's not clear that the perpetrator, Mark Hofmann, has been forthright about the third bomb that blew up in his car, in his lap.
How did that not kill him?
What's that?
How did that not kill him? I mean, he's serving a life sentence. How did he not die when a bomb blew up in his lap?
Yeah, it's not clear that it was made the same way. So it may be that he made a little bomb to throw people off by becoming a victim instead of the perpetrator. But of course, it just solidified the attention on him very quickly. So it didn't work. It, but it's possible he made the bomb for other people, and just the way, he might just have gotten lucky. One of the things that's highlighted in the movie is the fact that there he was, and just after being blown up by the bomb, a good Samaritan walked by, saw he was wearing the garments, and gave him a blessing, anointed him with oil, and commanded him to live. That gets prominent play in the documentary.
Wow.
So yeah, it's tough to know why he survived, and to me that remains a little bit mysterious even after watching this. And there were several books written about it. I read the books years and years ago. I didn't reread them to refresh my recollection, but
yeah,
I thought the fun thing about the documentary is he got a number of the people who were close to the story to be interviewed. And of course, they were all interviewed on television, 36, 37 years ago. And so now we get to see, how their views of those experiences have been shaped by time and experience. And so people who were at the time big defenders of Mark Hofmann now see him as the devil.
yeah.
One guy repeatedly just refers to him as Satan. And that's kind of how evil he was. It was only his runaway greed that prevented him from, succeeding in really altering Mormonism in dramatic ways.
And you can all watch that. Does it get a lot into the whole salamander stuff, or is that
Oh
more
yeah,
of or is that
yeah,
okay?
yeah. It's interesting. Hofmann was brilliant. The first thing he found, let's put that in air quotes, right? The
Right.
first thing he found was the Anton letter that corroborated one of the most important moments in church history when Joseph Smith took the hand copied translations to an expert who confirmed that they were well translated. And it's just, because of that letter, Mark Hofmann was brought into the inner sanctum of the church and was given instant credibility. And so he just was then able to begin to turn the table and work the opposite angle over and over again, harming the church because he had been established as a credible source by the brethren themselves.
That's
It's
crazy.
fascinating.
I almost see it's not the same thing by any means, but I'm reminded of John C. Bennett, who in the Nauvoo era kind of snuck into Nauvoo and ingratiated himself with Joseph Smith and Hiram and others.
Yeah.
And he was totally a bad actor and got him into all. And he was, of course, he was involved later on after he turned on Joseph Smith, in the prophets. I don't want to say the prophets' downfall, but the martyrdom and everything that happened there. So
Yeah.
I
So
need to watch this documentary.
yes.
I know much of the story, but I just have not gone. It's like, I don't know. I could do this, or I could watch Cobra Kai. I don't know. I'm just, what can I say, Devin? I'm not a good
Yeah,
person.
to break it up into pieces, watch the 3 episodes, one per week, and
There we go. One per week. All of Mormondom will have finished the whole thing, and I'll be here a month after the fact. Like, guys, have you seen this? Are
that's
you
right.
serious? Are
Yeah,
you serious?
for people your age and younger, this I think there are a lot of folks who just don't know this story. They may have heard about Mark
Yeah.
Hoffman, they may understand there were forgeries and bombings, but the story will blow young people away. Um,
I have to wonder what it's like watching this when you have no background in it and you're not a member of the church. I really want to watch it through that lens and see
yeah,
how this is for lay consumers and just to see what they would think of this little episode. Because Utah in the 80s, I mean, Utah is not a hugely populated state to begin with, but in the 80s, far more insular than it is now, for sure. I mean, you did not have these silicone slopes, you did not have the Olympics, you had none of this going on. Utah was a
Yeah, my
Different
office was
jam.
2 blocks from the one of the bombings.
Yeah.
I live, 100 yards from that bombing now. And so, yeah, this feels so real and present to me.
Believe it.
I can't really even imagine. I can't put myself in the shoes of someone who doesn't know the history, doesn't know the church, but it would be fascinating to get the take of someone who just sees it cold.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to check it out. I will report and tell you what I think of it,
Good, please.
Mr. Sir. So, cool thing that's come out here, the Wilford Woodruff Papers website is live. Did you even know there were Wilford Woodruff Papers? We hear so much about the Joseph Smith Papers. That's been this big project, right? But there's a foundation that handles Wilford Woodruff's papers, and it's not affiliated. I think they've worked with the church, but it's not a church organization that's handled this. But you go to wilfordwoodruffpapers.org, and you can see the first batch of transcribed documents, about 1,500 pages, with information about his family, historic images, a timeline of his life. He kept very meticulous records, it turns out. And so you can learn a ton about Wilford Woodruff, perhaps more than many other church leaders that we'll find over the years. And, the church, of course, I think wanted to take part in this and help out with it. I mean, and even, you got Richard Turley, who recently retired as the managing director of the church's comms department, is actually serving as the chair and advisor of the board for the Wilford Woodruff Papers. And his actual, they throw this in there, his third great grandfather, Theodore Turley, also was a missionary companion of Woodruff in England in the early 1840s. So, you got to touch that church royalty somehow. It's like how all the Irings, McConkeys, and Hinkleys are actually married to each other. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, this is pretty cool. I agree. I love that this is a resource, and it makes me wonder if we will receive other papers down the line. Will there be papers for lots of different prophets? Will there be foundations? It's kind of like the equivalent of a presidential library in a way, but for former church leaders, as far as having a research institution and lots of records from their past and their story, and a place where we can codify all that and store it and learn from it as time goes on. So I don't know. I mean, will we someday have a Gordon B. Hinckley Papers? I think that would be a great monument to his legacy, because if I'm being perfectly frank, the Gordon B. Hinckley Visitor Center building at BYU is kind of a letdown. So I think he deserves better. Just throwing that out there, everybody.
The
That's cool.
the time period through which he lived is the time period covered by the second volume of the Saints book.
Yes.
And I just finished that, and it is fascinating. So let me just interject that to those who have not read that, it is so full of history I didn't know. I'm embarrassed. And that was not the case for the first volume of Saints. I knew that history pretty well. There were no big surprises.
Because that's the stuff we cover when we do our Doctrine and Covenants study every year. But we top out by this at some point with Brigham Young, and we don't really go very far beyond it. So
yeah, we don't do much Brigham Young, let alone Wilford Woodruff. And so I really commend the book, Saints to everyone. And one of the cool things is I tend to read by listening. And the audio is available right for free in the new LDS library app, and so easy to access that. So
that's how I listened to. That's how I did the first Saints during my commute, and it was great.
I did it that way too, but I paid for the audiobook on that one. I didn't find it in the app.
That's the app is good, but unless they've changed it, some of the functionalities, it's not meant to be a media player. So because you can listen to audio of almost anything in the Gospel Library app if you turn that functionality on, which is amazing. They've had people dubbing all this stuff all over the app. The downside is it's not like a podcasting app or something else where it's going to kind of save your exact place where you were and pick it up. It's a little bit jankier than I'm sure what you had was more seamless in terms of just pausing an audiobook and carrying on.
Right.
But it's a free option and it's great.
Yeah.
Real quick mention, by the way, everybody, we talked about some things being postponed or put off. Also, the Tabernacle Choir has postponed its Heritage Tour, which was supposed to take place in 2020. This is a tour of many Nordic states, as well as Scotland and Wales, celebrating much of not the choir's heritage, but also the heritage of the church and many of these early Latter-day Saints who even sacrificed much to leave their homelands and come to, whether it was Ohio or Missouri or Illinois or the Salt Lake Valley, for example. we have a lot of history in these countries. So they were supposed to do it last year. That, of course, did not happen. And then they were trying to do it this year over the summer, but they have postponed that as well, which is unfortunate. But unlike the pageants, this will come back next year. Same locations. We don't know the exact dates, but the same venues have all committed to having the choir there in 2022 when they go to Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Scotland, and Wales. And that'll be great because the choir has not performed for a very long time. I actually dug this up. I tried to find when was the last time the choir just performed in any capacity. Best as I can tell, it was the music and the spoken word like this weekend last year. Wow. Before COVID hit and the church canceled all meetings. And since that time, Music and the Spoken Word has been doing archival broadcasts of the choir for safety. And of course, in general conference, they have just been using, previous broadcasts as well. So the choir has not, I don't know if they're rehearsing much or what they're doing, but we got to get them back in the game. I'm really hopeful that by October, for October conference, we might be able to do it from the conference center with the choir up there if they're safe, and maybe limited capacity in house for the rest, socially distanced.
Mm-hmm.
Not fill up the conference center, but space it out a bit and maybe pull that off like a movie theater.
Yeah, the challenge is the choir itself. It tends to be skews slightly older, not the most at-risk populations. They have to retire at 60, but it skews a little bit older, and there are 300 of them. That's a big group.
And it's very plosive. You can't exactly mask them up and ask them to sing to their best ability. So there are lots of things to consider.
Yeah, we've got to get COVID gone before they can come back safely. And then, if they all get vaccinated and
well, that's going to be the big kicker. But as a COVID aside, everyone, there's a great piece from The Atlantic from last week that sort of games the different scenarios by season for how things were going with COVID. I think it was a really interesting and thoughtful piece about, how we expect it to get better, how summer could very well be reasonably normal if we keep the vaccination rates up. The big question is just going to be if we get people vaccinated at a faster clip than any of these other versions of the virus can expand. That's the big kicker. And if we can make sure to do that before the fall, when the weather starts cooling again and the virus gets aggressive once more through the fall and winter, if we can do that, then next fall and winter will not be as bad and we can probably trudge through it. So anyway, it's a good piece. Maybe I'll link it here. Maybe I won't. If you want, shoot me an email, Jeff@thisweekinmormons.com. I'll send it to you. It's fine. I'll give you a PDF of it. How's that sound? No paywall for you people. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about the big news in Provo this week. I was almost blown off my couch when I started seeing photos on social media of
I woke up to
Rainbow Y.
Yeah.
And I truly was enthused. And I quickly learned that this had been organized, planned in advance. It was a big day-long celebration of the LGBTQ community on BYU's campus. And it had some of the hallmarks of officialdom. And so I really was beginning to think that this had been a sanctioned celebration.
Yeah.
And then BYU tweeted out a clarification, lest anyone be confused that no, this was not a sanctioned, approved, or otherwise good event. And I was disappointed with BYU's failure to see an opportunity in that same pronouncement to say, notwithstanding the fact that we didn't sanction this event, everyone is welcome at BYU, and we celebrate the LGBT community at BYU. But that didn't happen. I thought that was a shame.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction from their public affairs office. I'm with you on that one. They could have made it a better thing than it was. The funny thing was, too, is a lot of people talk about vandalism, and I love that the BYU Police Department actually said, the Lieutenant Jeff Long said that, of course, there's a concern that because the Y, vandalism does happen up there on the hillside of the Y, and that's something they're concerned about. But the act was not considered vandalism because the students used flashlights to make their little rainbow image, and no actual damage was done to anything. It's no different. It's like they could have all hiked up there just for funsies, and then they just happened to turn flashlights on to the beautiful white Y, which reflected their colors, and that was that. So I love that. I don't know if that was a sneaky way to do it, but I think it's also a nice way to show they weren't trying to vandalize any property. They were just...
It was perfect BYU behavior. Protest behavior. In hindsight, I thought it's just exactly the Utah nice, Mormon nice way to protest. Leave no trace. But it really made a point.
And this stems from a bigger thing, though, right? I mean, this was just sort of the culmination of Rainbow Day.
Yeah, Rainbow Day was celebrated across campus. Even some of the faculty were openly celebrating and talking about it. You highlighted an interesting thing that I hadn't seen before you shared it with me. It was the protest of the protest that was organized.
Yes.
Why don't you tell people about that flyer, at least, that you found?
And to be clear, no one said there were protests of any way. Student-led Rainbow Day was just a show of solidarity, not a protest of anything. So that's one side of it. Okay, they say it's not a protest. But then a flyer started circulating, which wasn't put out by BYU, to be clear. But it's this weird flyer that says, has the rainbow with a rainbow Y, which is funny because this is before we saw the actual rainbow Y on the hillside. Has the rainbow got you seeking shelter from the storm? And it shows this up in a cloud, rainbow rain falling down, but then hitting an umbrella with a family under it. And the family is all has just like BYU emblems on them. And then the family's holding the umbrella, and the umbrella says FAMPROC, the family proclamation. And then it says on March 4th, LGBT activists are protesting church teachings on BYU campus. Instead, faithful members will show their support for the family proclamation by wearing BYU swag and carrying or wearing an umbrella, which is an interesting choice. I get the visual there, but umbrellas are not fun to carry around if you don't need them. It's a terrible, cumbersome thing. I don't want to walk around with an umbrella just for fun to show solidarity. Think of something. Get a pin. Make something, buy some swag. So this went around, and understandably, many people were like, has the rainbow got you seeking shelter from the storm? Like, are you insinuating the LGBT population of BYU is a storm from which one needs to seek shelter? Obviously, this could flare up substantially and be a major issue. And BYU, for its part, saw these flyers on campus and also had them removed and taken down because they were not put out by the university. And they didn't receive any requests for public expression at this time, as they said. There's this counter protest of the non-protest was also sort of a non-protest, but it's kind of, like you said, classic Mormondom. It's this like sunny, passive aggressive way of going back and forth about this stuff.
Yeah.
Rather than addressing it head on, instead, let's just kind of be roundabout. Like, was that your secret combination? People walking around with umbrellas? I mean, I don't know. That just seems silly to me. So thankfully these came down, and also Rainbow Day, I don't think was some crazy anti-family happening. I think we can show solidarity with the LGBTQ community at BYU.
I think the church has repeatedly called on us to do exactly that, right?
And we're still navigating a lot of it. And the hardest thing I think for me with a lot of that, and with just LGBTQ issues in the church, is presumably what many people outside of our faith think of us as Latter-day Saints. Because of course, it's really easy to seize on anything we do and have bad press, like easily, right? It's much easier to paint Mormons as bigots with backward points of view on gay rights and things like that. And yeah, we do have certain beliefs as Latter-day Saints that I don't think are ever going to be fully reconcilable in that sense. But at the same time, I think we're trying to be more compassionate and moderate and understanding of what we're doing. But those stories aren't the ones that are easy to get out there. And it's a lot. I mean, I feel like I've been in my professional life a good ambassador for Mormons who can support the LGBTQ community, and people not understanding that previously. They'd be like, oh, I thought Mormons were like totally against like gay rights of any kind. You're like, well, no, it's not as simple as that. And that's good. Like, be that person, everyone. I'm not saying I've made a huge difference in anyone's life. Far from it. But we have to do our part, because otherwise it's really easy to perpetuate the idea that, Mormons are just more like radical fundamentalist Christians who hate gay people. And that's not true. And we need to do better. We need to do better to evangelize that message while still, of course, embrace your morality and the things we believe in. But, love people. Listen, learn, love, like Richard Osler told us.
Yeah.
Listen, learn,
so
love.
this is great. one of the things that was posted over the last week in preparation for this was a post from Spencer Minnick about BYU and the honor code and the LGBTQ community, and it got a lot of attention for a Facebook post. It got 6,600 reactions and 2,300 shares, 895 comments. So it's pretty well read. And, I think some people in the church could be offended by some of the tone, but overall, I thought it was a pretty compelling argument for empathy.
Well, what's the story here? What exactly is
basically Spencer is gay and went to BYU as a closeted gay man and struggled with the experience at BYU, and said it would have been so much nicer if he could have felt safe to talk about the challenges that he felt he was facing, could have talked to someone about the experiences he was having and felt safe to do that, and it did not feel like it was safe. And so he starts out his post by taking a typical quote that people will have posted, the sorts of things some Latter-day Saints have posted or BYU alumni have posted, and then just asks for empathy. But the typical post is, "You agreed to live by the honor code at BYU. If you don't like it, you should just leave. There are plenty of other options." And so he reacts to that, making the case for greater empathy, recognizing that almost all of us at that age in college, those are very formative years. We're going through a lot, all of us, and we need a little bit of space for growing up and getting help with growing up and meeting the challenges of the experience. So anyway, I thought it was a reasoned request for empathy.
I think it's really good too. I mean, and some stuff jumps out that's even a little more tangential, but like he talks about, I can tell you when I went through the temple, I had no idea what commitments or covenants I was making. I didn't understand what they yet meant. How great is it now that this just a few, 6 weeks ago or so, a little bit longer, the church included the main covenants that you make during the endowment session in the handbook. Things like this are good. These are good moves we're making to remove any ambiguity so that you do understand the covenants you're making, right? So that one little thing, hopefully, doesn't become as much of an issue that goes down. Here's one paragraph I'd like to read, though. He says, quote, we know that the church is unlikely to change. We know that the rules are not likely to change. But if you are telling me that a shred of humanity, understanding, and empathy toward those going through the most lonely thing they'll ever experience is too much to ask for, I'm going to tell you that it might be time for you to check in with Jesus. Check yourself against the very Christ-like love that you preach, end quote. I think that's a great line, and I think we're still evolving as a people. But how can we say we don't have empathy? And there's so many I've seen who feel that just showing love and listening to these members of our faith is tantamount to apostasy. You are endorsing the evil for some reason. And that's honest. I don't know if you probably didn't see this, but a few weeks ago, for example, Richard Ostler, who we've had on the show, I could tell he posted up asking if people would review his book. He didn't say much more about it, but if you looked, it's because he was getting review bombed a little bit by people calling him a wolf in sheep's clothing. And his book is sold at Deseret Book. These are reviews on DeseretBook.com. If your book is published and carried by Deseret Book, at some level, the church is giving you an okay.
Yeah.
At some level, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's just staggering to me. And I have to recognize there are different points of view, but I don't look at someone like Richard Ostler, whose entire goal is merely to talk to people and hear their stories and love them, as the same as just condoning a certain way of being and, reneging on your covenants or anything like that. It's just dude, we just have to love people. And I think it's a good post. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think it's good. Good reminder.
This is a great point to sort of segue into, if you don't mind, Geoff, if we jump into this. You grabbed this article about the church continuing to oppose the Equality Act. And
yes.
this is the heart of what we're really talking about here. And so it's a good way to continue the discussion. And because the church was pretty proactive in helping Utah pass legal LGBTQ protections, and fewer than half of the states have them. And the same protections are not codified in federal law. So Utah is a remarkable leader in LGBTQ rights on the national stage. We're not certainly on the bleeding edge, but we're certainly, current with the times. And so the church's opposition to the Equality Act, I don't think should be read as opposition to LGBTQ rights as much as it is opposition to that version. And Utah Congressman Chris Stewart has been advocating for an alternative that is not supported broadly by the LGBTQ community, but the Washington Blade, which is kind of an LGBTQ publication, did a really fascinating summary and side-by-side comparison of current law versus the Equality Act versus the Fairness for All Act. That I think the Fairness for All Act has at least an implied endorsement from the church because of it's supported by several Utah legislators. But it's interesting. Let me just say this. When we talk about protecting the LGBT community from discrimination, we have to remember that the discrimination they face is mostly from religious people. And so if we exempt religious people from the requirements to discriminate or not discriminate against the LGBT community, TQ community, then we fail to provide any protection, because the people who we want to protect them from get an out. And so we have to lean into the difficult space in the middle of all of this and talk about what sorts of protections for the LGBTQ community really do and really do not infringe on religious rights. Discrimination and hatred certainly are not religious rights inherently, but at the same time, requiring someone to perform a sex change operation because they have the technical skills may not make sense. That may genuinely violate someone's religious beliefs. So it's tough. It's a tough space. I think we got to lean into it and find a solution.
I really appreciate, Devin, that you found this chart from the Washington Blade. I think it's extremely easy to get wrapped up when we're talking about this issue of assuming that because the church supports the Fairness for All Act, that sounds kind of hackneyed, and it really means, we want to kind of have things our way. And This chart's really useful because it shows, like you said, now after Bostock, with the Equality Act, with Fairness for All Act, and it compares all these different areas. And I'm loving looking over this. This is, of course, one publication's interpretation of it, but to me, it comes off as thorough and fair-minded, I think. I don't think it's going out of its way to pick a fight with any side or anything like that. And it just reminds you of the few areas where it differs the most. I mean, what you're really getting down to is I see a lot of things like, could a religious camp or religious retreat refuse admission to someone for being LGBTQ, for example? With the Equality Act, no. With FFA, definitely yes. There's little things like this, like whether the church could deny employment to somebody for being LGBTQ, which I struggle a little bit with that one, because I feel like, well, if you have the church employees, you have to have a recommend, but if you have a temple recommend and you're worthy, well, that's fine. Why would you want to open up the door for them to be able to fire somebody just for being gay, for example? But could a small business with 15 or fewer employees refuse to serve LGBTQ people? This brings back, in my mind, Masterpiece Cake Shop, for example. Under the Equality Act, no. Under FFA, yes. So we'll try to embed this or link out to this chart. I think this is good reading because it shows you a lot of the nuances there. And I appreciate it coming from you, Devin. You're an ardent, passionate leftist, and you are but you are seeing the sensibility that they're striving for with this sort of act. I think that's good. And if we can get that narrative out there, it'll help people understand a lot better what it is. And there's plenty of it I don't yet understand, but I think this is a good area for us to explore. So I'm glad you found that. I think it's really great that you dug that up.
I would vote for the Equality Act if I were in Congress, but I think we've
But
got
you're
to have
not.
the
You're
hard
still not.
conversations. But let's be clear. I'm not, and we've got to have the conversations.
Devin, are we still in the stages of grief? Are you in
Yeah.
denial right now? Are you still working through that?
No,
You haven't
I'm
gotten to
at
acceptance
anger.
yet?
I'm
Are
at
you
anger.
bargaining yet?
I'm at anger.
So circling back to BYU here, you might remember after a lot of things that went down in 2020, especially the George Floyd related protests, Black Lives Matter, BYU's president, Kevin Worthen, announced they were forming a committee to study racism on campus and formulate recommendations. I think honestly, I think this was met with a bit of an eye roll from many people who thought this would just be one of these formalities, one of these things we do to save face and look like we care. They have come out with their report, and absolutely, to BYU's credit, this thing has teeth, and they are taking this seriously. And I've read through some of the report. It's like 50 odd pages, but like single spacing. I mean, it's like really for people who know how to read. This is not Harry Potter margins, people. It's very upsetting. So a 63-page report. You can check it out, but I'm really glad to see they're serious about this. They have surveyed students. They have looked at those who have experienced derogatory remarks, felt isolated, been stared at, intimidated, bullied. Those are just some examples. But they are serious about instituting reforms that are going to get this better. And there's 26, I think, specific reforms they want to get into. They want to create a central office of diversity and belonging. They want to create a new position of vice president for diversity, implement clear lines of accountability to empower the office of diversity to handle its job, essentially. Some of the other ones that jump out at me here. Consider additions to the aims of BYU education that reflect statements from prophets and apostles about the need to demonstrate civility, racial and ethnic harmony, and mutual respect. That's awesome if you're making that part of your mission statement. Establish a new position of vice president or associate vice president of enrollment and student success that is empowered to do things. A lot of actual things they want to stand up, and hopefully they'll back them up as time goes on. There's even select prestigious scholarship recipients with a greater emphasis on a holistic review of the entire applicant file. I don't know what that implies they were doing before, but I'm glad that they want to look at the entire applicant file. I think that's a great thing. But they also want to create socioeconomic disadvantaged scholarships. This is, I think, BYU getting very close to essentially admitting that systemic racism is real, which is a thorny issue in a lot of communities, and saying like, look, we have to recognize that even that your race alone at times can put you at a socioeconomic disadvantage. Yeah. And we should be sensitive to that. Is that across the board? No. But is that still something we need to consider as we're looking at the needs of our students? Absolutely. I think it's great. You can check these out. This is a Deseret News article that goes through a lot of the rundown of it, and we can link out to the main piece. But I'm thrilled that they have like taken this seriously, and they mean it. Hopefully it makes you sad. You think BYU is this happy, sunny place, but you also don't. I'm a white guy from suburban California. Like I don't know what the lived experience was for the minorities in that sense at BYU and what they dealt with. And I'm sure there were some real things going on that I was completely oblivious to during even my time there. And I'm glad we've come a long way in coming at these things.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about which story to grab here. Let's talk quickly about Girl Scouts, girls in the Scouts organization. 1,000 girls have now become Eagle Scouts.
They've
That's
done
an
it.
exciting milestone that
Huzzah!
you identified. I think that's cool. It's a shame to me that the church has not remained engaged in a more open scouting program. I think that is good growth for the Scouts. And
but I don't think that's why they walked away. I think they walked away because we finally recognized scouting just wasn't a good use of our resources at the end of the day. Honestly, for how much money you put into it, for what you get out, we could just do it ourselves for less.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
But I love seeing girls doing boy stuff. It's just, there's so many ways in which this world continues.
Well, Devin, you must be thrilled with the fact that obviously now we're going to have men pretending to be women playing on sports teams, and the whole world is ending, as you well know.
Oh my gosh. Some of the controversies. Yes. Sorry.
We can make everything a controversy. Everything is a controversy if we want to be. That's a good one. Here's one thing too. So, you know, DezNat. You know, DezNat, we've talked about a bit. What is DezNat? It's a movement. It's just a hashtag, whatever. Apparently, Utah is looking at creating a new flag because, as Devin, you mentioned before the show, many of the flags are just sort of a deep navy with a state seal on them, which is actually the truth. Many flags are. Not every flag can be super cool like Colorado or Ohio or some of these states that really know what they're doing. Or California, we have a bear. Come at me, rest of the world.
Yeah.
So Utah has a flag that shows basically if you got 4 triangles, meaning top triangle's navy, bottom triangle's red, white triangles on the sides, they're all coming together to form a rectangle. And above that, just a big old beehive with a star on it. I think this thing is ugly and nobody should use it anyway. This is a terrible flag. They can do way better than this. But apparently this flag is also used by DezNat folks. And now this has come to the attention of legislators in Utah who are realizing, oh, maybe this should not be the state's flag if it is too closely linked to a controversial group. So I just think it's like tragicomic in a way. I just but if this is what it takes for us not to use this flag in Utah, good. I want to know the other flag options. Mississippi outsourced. They did a contest to create their new flag because they removed the Confederate flag from their state flag. It was still there. That was great. New Zealand had a contest to redo their flag because they wanted to get rid of the Union Jack on their flag and also because their flag looked too similar to that of Australia. Anyways, Utah, you can do. I like the beehive. Lean into the beehive, but I don't know what's up with this weird cross-color thing you've got going on. Maybe you know the history of it, Devin. I have no idea.
I don't know. Those lines do very subtly evoke the Confederate battle flag.
Yeah.
That's why DezNat likes it. But that's pretty subtle.
It's a lame flag. You could go on Fiverr and get a better flag than that. Come on, Utah.
Let's do that. Let's go on Fiverr.
I should go on there and have somebody. I'll do it. I might actually do it. I'm very bored right now. That'd be fun.
There you go.
I'm game.
So,
go
ahead.
I'm gonna do some quick ones real quick, because our time is running long.
Yes.
You've all followed. I've not the first time I've mentioned the story of the once Tooele Temple in beautiful Tooele, the wonderful Tooele Valley of Utah, land of deserts and arid bliss and nuclear depositories and things like that.
There is that. Chemical weapons.
Who doesn't love Tooele? But so the church announced a while ago, a couple years ago, they built a temple in the Tooele Valley Temple. Beautiful. It made a lot of waves for being the first new temple in Utah not to have an angel Moroni on it, even on the top of it. But the architecture is cool. One thing they wanted to do here, building this temple in Erda. Erda is kind of equidistant between Stansbury Park, Grantsville, and Tooele City to the main population centers of the valley. Erda is just farmland. There's not much going on in Erda.
Tiny town.
And I hope I'm saying that correctly. Maybe it's Erda. I don't know. I'm not. Okay. So along with the temple, as the church often does, they wanted to build a housing development around it. Build some houses. And I've read things that aren't official, but they say that part of doing this is so that basically it helps offset the cost of running utilities to a temple that's more isolated, where it's not as easy to run it. So if you build this housing, you sell the land, blah, 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 all the money you get back, you profit from it. That's great. They wanted to build some housing, pretty much just not that dense suburban housing, but there were many, many individuals who were upset about this and did not want this because they felt it was too dense. It did not reflect the community, which in fairness, it does not, because Erda is farmland and
very rural.
Yep. Having two houses more than 100 feet from one another is dense for that area. Even though this was not dense, this was not like a big mixed use project with 5-story condo buildings and, a cool bistro on the ground floor, nothing like that. So, but activists who are members of the church who want a temple in general pushed back enough to make the church uncomfortable with going forward with the plans for this temple. Or sorry, not for the temple, but for the housing development. And then as we've spoken before on the podcast, this culminated earlier in the year with the church announcing that they're removing the temple entirely. So I guess without that housing development, I guess I'm assuming financially it was not there to put the temple in that location, so they moved it down more into the outskirts of Tooele itself. And I have not heard if they intend to actually develop another housing
Probably isn't
thing with
necessary.
it. Probably less so. So I just think it's fascinating that this can happen, especially among Latter-day Saints loving their own church. The Salt Lake Tribune points this out, but I also remember when the MTC wanted to build a big tower, and the residents whose homes go along the backside of it, their backyards, said there was sort of a gentleman's handshake agreement for decades from the church, saying like, we're never going to build tall buildings because we don't want to ruin your sightlines and have, missionaries looming over your house like you're making your breakfast and you've got missionaries up above 7 stories above you looking down at you. And there was the same thing. The residents like went to Provo City and got the church to back off. But that's the MTC. This is a temple. This is the temple. And they're just like, no. So cool. It's just cool background on this. A story we've talked about a lot, but here's some background at the Trib if you're down with it.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I just again trying to go through a couple of these quickly. I was thrilled to see the church throw in $20 million to UNICEF to help fund the COVID vaccinations around the world,
which is awesome.
It is awesome. This is not the first time the church has done this sort of thing. The church has donated a couple of $1 million at different times to Rotary to support the efforts at vaccinating kids against polio. And so it was exciting for me to see this, that continuing this pattern of supporting global public health efforts. Great to see this use of funds, especially at this scale, because there's a lot of tension around the world over fighting over vaccines and how we're going to get them. And I was talking to a friend in Canada today, and they are not getting vaccines yet, and I wouldn't have thought that was a problem. So,
well, Devin, when you have socialized medicine,
yeah, good to see the church stepping up to help out.
When you pay for your health care, you get vaccines sooner. I got to quit doing all the dry jokes. I don't know. It's fine. Yeah. That's unfortunate for the members of Canada. Another thing, we're going to do just a couple more here. Oh, I want to leave Mike Lee for you because I think that'll make you so excited. Okay. So BYU's hiring. They're shifting the focus at BYU from, how do we describe it? From religious studies. They're shifting it for make more faith building before it is scholarship focused would be the way to look at it. I think this has kind of gone back and forth through the history of BYU. Sure. Should BYU's religious department function in an academic context and let you studying the scriptures academically, or should it be something that's more like going to institute or Sunday school where it's an actual place you go for uplift even though you're at a university? I can understand all schools of thought for this. I hope it doesn't. I get it when you take kind of the core classes, I remember when I went there, you had to take the core ones. You take your Book of Mormon, New Testament, Doctrine and Covenants, but you had religious electives, and those were fascinating and way interesting. And for those, I actually enjoyed kind of an academic approach for those classes in particular. But I think there are some who might disagree with this approach. They think the church is sacrificing academic rigor in favor of just having I hate to say this, but like CES goons who can come in and.
Yeah, clearly this is BYU's choice. It's their option. It's their school. The church gets to pick, and there are a lot of programs around the country where there are thoughtful Mormon scholars in and out of the church studying Mormonism, and so there are places for that academic focus. It would be great in my mind if it were also true at BYU, but I see, the church clearly wants that to be more Sunday school-ish than academic. And, that's the church's choice.
I wonder when the last time was that they've tried to switch around like this. When I went to BYU, I felt like especially the core religious classes felt little different than the institute classes I'd taken prior to transferring there. I mean, they didn't feel academic really at all. They felt like they were essentially Sunday school classes with homework. And, yeah. And that was fine. And that's kind of what I expected going there. So I'm not sure if it's changed much. I can't imagine those main ones have. So I'm curious how this will affect things going forward. But I like that you drew that good distinction, though. I mean, we have other even non-religious universities with Mormon studies programs. Claremont's one that comes to mind, for example.
Yeah.
And they're doing a lot of that work. I guess you would think, there is the Maxwell Center, of course, that's a thing. So the research and publishing side of it exists. But I guess, and I don't know, like, what if you wanted to, would you go to BYU if you wanted to get a graduate degree in religious studies? That's another question that this brings up, right? If you wanted to do that, would you then go to BYU? Because then you're not going to get necessarily that more academic approach where your work would be peer reviewed and respected in the community.
Yeah.
So maybe now you're just going down to Claremont. I don't know, but it's an interesting area. I guess it's fine. I think it's okay. I mean, I like the religious education I had at BYU in that sense, but now in hindsight, though, with some of the more scholarly things I've learned in that time, I appreciate that side of it too. And it's strictly knowledge. I get that. It's not something that's like affirming me, but at the same time, for example, like being more scholarly about church history for me, I think helps me to process some of the not as good in our church history rather than have to just sweep it under the rug and try to wash over it, to process it better. I think that helps me to understand it better and have that nuance and this and that. So if those things go out the window, I'm not saying they will, but I just hope it stays
it'll be,
good.
it's just a shift in the focus. I think for some of the folks at BYU, the professors, I think there was some disappointment because the change in process meant that they basically made a recommendation to the administration, and the church rejected their recommendations for filling a couple of open positions. And so
Because it's going to be much more CES system focused to fill those slots instead, right? So it doesn't matter what kind of I don't want to say actual credentials, like CES is not a credential, but sorry, I've got way too many opinions. All the time I saw like institute teachers were like men, for one, like always men, and ones who just like didn't shake a career doing something else. That, in my experience, that's what they always were. Or they were aspiring to something else. It was like, oh yeah, I couldn't get through law school, so I decided to teach institute. And that's great, and you do a great service. I just think there is a bit of a difference there from someone who might have like a hardcore passion for the New Testament. And I'm not saying those people don't exist either. I'm sure they exist in the CES system.
Sure. There are some great academics in Mormondom, and but yeah, it's we want to see we need everything. We need everything. The church would really be in trouble if there weren't serious PhD carrying uh, people who are studying doctrine and church history. But maybe it doesn't need to happen at BYU. Maybe it happens somewhere else.
It's fair. All right, Devin, let's take us out. Tell me about your boy.
We teased Mike Lee at the top. We'll maybe close on Mike Lee, but Mike Lee is becoming famous now for his arguably inappropriate church references in the context of politics.
He's doing a great job pandering to his base. He knows what he's doing.
That's exactly
There's
right.
no way Ben McAdams beats him when he's got this going on. Come on.
Yeah, I'm hoping my good friend Ben can beat Mike in 2022, but we'll see. But yeah, it is pandering. That's what it is.
Sorry, I got ahead of it. But what happened?
So those were good words to describe it. Yes, in the context of a political discussion about COVID, he quoted from "Come, ye saints," to say all is well someday. So anyway, yeah.
Well, I mean, the main idea is that he's protesting the bloat of the COVID relief passage. And of course, given his views on government, that's completely understandable.
Yes, although it's completely inconsistent with his view that the tax relief bill was perfectly okay, even though it resulted in massive deficits.
But Devin,
giving money to poor people instead of rich people bothers him.
There he is. There's Canada Devin right there. No, but the thing is, Devin, that's just step one. Step two is then to say, oh no, we have less revenue. We have to cut programs, of course. It's all a plan. That's the whole plan. That's the whole idea. Yes, I agree with this. By the way, if you ever want to, if you can handle the profanity of it, John Oliver's Last Week Tonight from this past week about the unemployment program in the United States and the history of it, just fascinating, if anything. Really interesting to see some of the numbers and the things behind that, and how the studies have shown that when you give money to people, they're more like, they don't usually save it, they spend it, and so the money you give actually generates more money than you put in. It's one point of view, but I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah.
But Mike Lee here, he's mostly just speaking of believe he's speaking of that's basically all will be well, as he is saying.
Yeah.
When we like get over this and like don't pass this bill, he's not saying like all is well, like COVID will get behind us. He's saying all is well. We will get the government off our backs and all will be well.
I don't know what he meant exactly, but clearly the intent was to signal to his base that he's their guy. They should stand behind him. And I think that's sick and wrong.
Chris Stewart called the bill completely absurd.
Yes, but at least he didn't sing a hymn.
The only thing I want to say about this is not Latter-day Saint focused. Yes, it's big. I don't love it when everyone puts riders on stuff. I don't like, let it be a COVID relief bill, specifically just a COVID relief bill. Like I'm all for the debate about the minimum wage. I don't think this needs to be a part of that. I understand why people try to shoehorn other ideas in there because it could pass potentially, but I wish we didn't do things that way.
Yeah. I think parliamentarian got it technically right. And that this didn't fit within a bill that could be approved through the budget reconciliation process. But I think that's a shame that was the case. But yeah, clearly the Democrats were doing exactly what you're suggesting.
And all sides do it. I wish they didn't, but it's happened for years. I wish they would just stop and let this be specifically about COVID relief. That said, there are some circles that will argue that only, like, they say, 9% of it or something like that is actually about COVID relief. And that is just flatly not true. And I've seen that come in some circles on social media. And if you do some research and dig around and find out what's the actual content of the bill, or, for example, listen to the 1A podcast from Monday when they walked through and broke down the contents of the bill, also a great way to do it. It is more than 9%. There is some interpretation there as far as like what defines COVID relief. Sure. Yeah. But it's more than 9% because Stewart's one of the ones who says, 9% is for COVID relief. No, it's not
9%. Poppycock.
That is not me speaking as one party or another. That is me speaking as someone who just recognizes partisan bull crap when he sees it from either side. And that's just get away from that, people. Get away from that. Anyway, what a great show, though. A lot of great things happening for Latter-day Saints, man.
Great work, Geoff. Great work.
Thank you, Devin. I've worked hard to be here. This is my jam. Anyway, everybody, we hope that you will join us at thisweekinmormons.com. You can see we publish articles ourselves, blog posts, things. We have the Latter-day Saint Video Vault reviewing old 80s church films, classic church films, things like that. We have the Convert Files where Jeff Borders, a convert, talks about some of his experiences being a convert to the church and what he's learned from that. Cool stuff you can read there. We hope you'll check it out. We hope you'll subscribe to this podcast. If you have not done so, hit that subscribe button in your podcatcher. If you're streaming this on our website and you use your mobile device, there's links right there for Apple, for Google, for Spotify, or Stitcher, whatever you want. Please do that. Please, please, please. That'd be wonderful of you. And if you want to join our fun Patreon community, $2 a month to help us pay the bills, help us get a better website, even though I rebuilt it last year. You know what I mean. Just, get in there, and we love your support. It means a lot to all of us. Thank you to those of you on Patreon who do support the show. It means the world to us. It's very flattering, truly, that you think this is worth your investment, honestly. And speaking of worthy of his investment, it is nice of Devin Thorpe, of course, to be here and find that this show is worth his time and his effort. Thank you. So I appreciate having you here, Devin. Nice to have you, buddy.
Honor to be here.
We can't wait to touch base again. Maybe I'm going to put you, maybe you won't do it or maybe you will, but General Conference is coming up and we love to recap. So you can think about whether you want to be a part of that show or not.
Yeah, great. I will look forward to that.
All right, everybody. So until then, we're almost to the Ides of March. We hope you have a terrific week and we'll talk to you next week. Be well, be holy, and be happy. Bye-bye.